The smell of burnt sage and expensive wine hit me before I even pushed through the kitchen doors of Il Cavalier. My fingers ached from gripping textbooks all morning, my shoulders tight from hunching over culinary theory I couldn't afford to fail. The midtown cold had turned my carefully pinned hair into a frizzy disaster, and I was already 15 minutes late for the dinner shift. Kayla. Vincent, the floor manager, materialized beside me as I fumbled with my apron ties. His normally bronze face pale and waxy. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist hard enough to hurt. Table 12. VIP section. You're taking it. What? I yanked my arm back, checking the knot. That's Claire's section. I don't have VIP clearance. Claire quit. An hour ago. Just walked out. Vincent's eyes darted toward the dining room, then back to me, and I saw something I'd never seen in 3 months of working under him. Genuine fear. Listen to me, Kayla. This table, these people, they're untouchable. You serve. You smile. You do not engage. Understand? My stomach dropped. I needed this job more than oxygen. 6 months ago, I'd maxed out my credit cards to cover the deposit for the Institute of Culinary Education, betting everything on a future I wasn't sure I'd ever reach. My studio in Astoria cost twice what I earned, my student loans were hemorrhaging interest, and my mother's voice still echoed in my head. You'll never be anything but the help, baby. That's all people like us get to be. Who is it? I asked, smoothing my black skirt with shaking hands. Vincent leaned in close. Luca DeSantis. The name landed like a fist to my sternum. Every server, every line cook, every dishwasher at Il Cavalier knew that name. The owner's business associate. The man whose reservations cleared the entire VIP section. The man whose parties ended with black cars idling outside until 3 a.m. He asked for someone who wouldn't cause problems, Vincent continued, already turning away. Someone invisible. That's you tonight, Kayla. Invisible. That had become my specialty over the past 6 months. Head down, voice soft, ambitions carefully hidden behind a practiced smile. I'd perfected the art of serving people who'd never see me as anything more than the help. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. That's how I'll know you truly liked it. Even if you're watching on your TV, grab a second to join this family of fans who love emotional and heartfelt stories. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you even more tales like this. I took a breath that did nothing to steady my pulse and pushed through the double doors. The main dining room of Il Cavalier glowed with old-world opulence. Murano glass chandeliers, hand-painted frescoes on the ceiling, tables draped in cream linen that cost more than my monthly rent. Classical music drifted from hidden speakers, just loud enough to soften the clink of silverware against bone china. This was where Manhattan's elite came to pretend they were dining in a Tuscan villa, where a single bottle of wine could cover my grocery bill for a month. I moved through the space with my spine straight and my chin level, the way my mother had taught me to carry myself in rooms where we didn't belong. Past the main dining area, down a corridor lined with black and white photographs of the Amalfi Coast, toward the VIP section reserved for clients who paid extra for discretion. I stopped at the heavy oak door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then I knocked twice and entered. The VIP room was darker than the main dining area, lit by amber sconces that cast long shadows across burgundy wallpaper. A large round table dominated the center, and around it sat 5 men in suits cut so precisely they looked like weapons. Their conversation died the instant I stepped inside, and 5 pairs of eyes turned toward me. But only one gaze held me. He sat at what I could only describe as the head of the round table, though that should have been impossible. Dark hair swept back from a sharp, angular face. A jaw that looked carved from marble, shadowed with stubble that was either effortlessly perfect or meticulously maintained. His suit was charcoal gray, custom-fitted to shoulders that suggested he did more than sit in expensive restaurants. But it was his eyes that pinned me in place. Dark, calculating, utterly cold. Not angry. Not cruel. Just empty, in a way that made my throat tighten. He looked younger than I'd expected, mid-30s at most, but he wore power like a second skin. I dropped my gaze immediately, heat flooding my neck. "Good evening, gentlemen." My voice came out steady, professional. "My name is Kayla, and I'll be your server this evening. May I start you with something to drink?" I moved around the table, notepad in hand, hyper-aware of the way their conversations had stopped, of the way the man at the head didn't look away. When I reached him last, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying me the way someone might examine a wine list. "You're new here," he said. Not a question. A statement delivered in a voice like smoke, low, smooth, with the faint trace of an Italian accent. 3 months, sir," I replied, pen poised over my notepad. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. "And what's a girl like you doing serving tables at Il Cavalier?" "Girl like you." The condescension was so subtle it almost wasn't there. "Almost. Paying my tuition, sir. May I get you something to drink?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Barolo, the 16 brunette. And bring enough glasses for the table." I nodded and turned toward the door when one of the other men, older, silver-haired, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned over and whispered something in DeSantis's ear. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. DeSantis's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted, a new tension settling across his shoulders like a predator catching a scent. I slipped out before he could look at me again. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall and exhaled. My hands were shaking. Something about that room, about him, made the air feel thinner, like there wasn't quite enough oxygen to breathe properly. I hurried toward the wine cellar, my mind racing. Invisible, Vincent had said. Just stay invisible. But when I returned 10 minutes later with a bottle and 7 glasses balanced on a silver tray, I realized that staying invisible might no longer be an option. The moment I stepped through the door, I heard it. Italian. Rapid fire and fluid, spoken between DeSantis and the man to his right, a younger associate with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed trying too hard. Marco, I'd later learn his name was. I moved silently around the table, pouring wine with practiced precision, keeping my eyes down and my expression neutral. They didn't even glance at me. "E questa stronza che non capisce un caso," DeSantis said, gesturing lazily toward the door. "And this idiot here doesn't understand a damn thing." Marco laughed, sharp and cruel. "Americana tipica. Probabilmente non se nemmeno dove si trova l'Italia sulla mappa." Typical American. Probably doesn't even know where Italy is on a map. I kept pouring, my face carefully blank, but my pulse spiked. Every word landed with crystal clarity. DeSantis took a sip of wine, then continued in Italian, his voice dripping with contempt. "Guarda come se move, così impacciata. Come una serva spaventata. Scammetto che pensa di essere intelligent perché via una scuola di cucina de 4 soldi. Look at how she moves, so clumsy. Like a frightened deer. I bet she thinks she's intelligent because she goes to some cheap cooking school." Something hot and sharp twisted in my chest. My hand tightened on the bottle. Then Marco leaned in, grinning. "Magari è pure brava a letto, no? Lo cameriere disprete di solito lo sono. Maybe she's good in bed, though. Desperate waitresses usually are." They both laughed. I finished pouring the last glass. Set the bottle down with perfect control. And then I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do in a room like this. I leaned in, close enough that DeSantis could smell the lavender in my shampoo, and spoke 4 words in perfect formal Italian. "Congiuntivo, non indicativo, signore. Subjunctive, not indicative, sir." The room went silent. Every head turned toward me. Marco's face drained of color. And Luca DeSantis's eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. I just corrected a Mafia boss's grammar. In front of his men. In his own language. And from the way his jaw tightened and his pupils dilated, I just made the most dangerous mistake of my life. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then DeSantis leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, and gestured toward the wine bottle with 2 fingers. "Leave it," he said in English, his voice silk over steel. I set the Barolo down carefully, my hand steadier than I had any right to expect, and stepped back toward the wall. Vincent's words echoed in my skull. "Invisible. Stay invisible." But DeSantis's eyes followed me like a physical weight. I retreated to my position near the door, notepad clutched against my apron, trying to become part of the burgundy wallpaper. The men resumed their conversation in English, something about shipping routes and customs paperwork, but the tension in the room had shifted. DeSantis spoke to the others, but his attention kept sliding back to me. Not obvious, just enough to make my skin prickle. When I moved forward to refill water glasses, his gaze tracked every step. I reached for the silver pitcher on the sideboard, my movements careful and measured. That's when his hand shot out, fast, deliberate, and knocked his wine glass sideways. Red wine exploded across the white tablecloth, spreading like blood. The crystal glass rolled toward the edge, and I lunged forward on instinct, catching it milliseconds before it hit the floor. "Madonna," DeSantis muttered, his tone perfectly flat. "How clumsy of me." But his eyes told a different story. This was a test. "No harm done, sir." I set the glass upright, already pulling a clean napkin from my apron to blot the wine. My hands didn't shake. I wouldn't let them. "You're quick," he observed, watching me work with the intensity of a scientist studying a specimen. "Good reflexes for someone so impacciata." Clumsy. He deliberately used the Italian word, his accent caressing each syllable. I kept my expression neutral, dabbing at the stain. "I'll bring you a fresh glass, sir." "No need." He picked up the wine-stained glass and took a deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't mind a little mess." Marco laughed, too loud, too eager, and DeSantis turned toward him, switching seamlessly into rapid Italian. "Allora, Marco, parliamo di Napoli. Hai confermato l'incontro con I Castellano." So, Marco, let's talk about Naples. "Did you confirm the meeting with the Castellanos?" I moved back toward the wall, pulse hammering, as Marco launched into a detailed response about logistics and timing. Business talk. I should have tuned it out. But then DeSantis's voice dropped lower, more casual, and I caught the shift in his tone, the way a predator's growl changes before it strikes. "Sai una cosa, Marco? Questa ragazza. You know something, Marco? This girl here." He gestured toward me without looking, still staring at Marco. "Cammina come si avesse pora della propria ombra. Tipico dell'americane che pensano di poter giocare nei nostri ristoranti senza sapere un caso di niente. She walks like she's afraid of her own shadow. Typical of Americans who think they can play in our restaurants without knowing a damn thing." Marco grinned, emboldened. "Probabilmente pensa che cacio e pepe sia un piatto messicano." She probably thinks cacio e pepe is a Mexican dish. They both laughed. And something inside me, something I'd kept carefully locked away for 6 months, snapped clean in half. DeSantis reached for his wine glass again, swirling the Barolo with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been challenged in his life. He took a slow sip, then continued in Italian, his voice rich with condescension. "Guarda come finge di non ascoltare. Come si le sue orecchiette americane potessero distinguere l'italiano dal portuguese." Look at how she pretends not to listen. As if her little American ears could distinguish Italian from Portuguese. Marco leaned forward, warming to the game. "Magari pensa che stiamo parlando di calcio o di pasta." Maybe she thinks we're talking about soccer or pasta. The other men at the table had gone quiet, watching the exchange with varying degrees of discomfort. One of them, an older man with silver temples, shifted in his seat and cleared his throat softly. A warning that went unheeded. DeSantis's lips curved into something approximating a smile, cold and predatory. "Sai cosa mi chiedo, Marco? Mi chiedo se questa tua salita. You know what I wonder, Marco? I wonder if this failed cook. He paused for effect, examining his wine in the amber light. Se prebonce fare un semplice risotto senza bruciarlo. Pero suppongo che nelli su sculiconomish insignino solo come prior baritoli e sorridir ai clienti ricchi. Could even make a simple risotto without burning it. But I suppose in her cheap schools they only teach how to open jars and smile at rich customers. Marco laughed again, louder now, encouraged by his boss's performance. Then he made his mistake. Comunque per tornare a Napoli, se I castellano accetano, dovresti portar qualcuno che parla bene. Non Marco. Anyway, back to Naples. If the Castellanos accept, you should bring someone who speaks well. Not like Marco. He'd meant it as self-deprecating humor, a way to deflect from his own linguistic limitations. But he'd used the wrong verb form. Accetano instead of accetino, indicative instead of subjunctive, the kind of grammatical error that marks someone as unrefined, uneducated in the formal registers of Italian that old-world families like the Castellanos would demand. De Santis didn't correct him. He simply nodded, taking another sip of wine, the error either unnoticed or beneath his concern. But I'd heard it. Crystal clear. And in that moment, every ounce of shame my mother had drilled into me, every humiliation I'd swallowed working in restaurants where people looked through me like glass, every time I'd bitten my tongue and smiled and played the obedient help, all of it crystallized into something hard and bright and reckless. I stepped forward. De Santis was mid-sentence, saying something about shipping containers, when I moved into his peripheral vision. He paused, irritation flashing across his features. I set my notepad down on the table with deliberate care. Then I leaned in, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough that my hair nearly brushed his shoulder, and spoke 4 words in perfect formal Italian. Congiuntivo, non indicativo, signore. Subjunctive, not indicative, sir. My voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely precise. The Florentine accent I'd inherited from my grandmother's bedtime stories, the one I'd polished through 4 years of university Italian and countless hours buried in Dante and Manzoni, rang clear in those 4 syllables. The effect was instantaneous. Marco's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. The silver-haired man's eyebrows shot up. One of the younger associates actually coughed into his napkin. And De Santis went completely still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of an apex predator that had just realized its prey had teeth. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my lungs forget how to work. I watched his jaw tighten, watched the muscle jump beneath the stubble, watched something dangerous and electric flash across his face. Rage and fascination and something else I couldn't name. The seconds stretched like pulled taffy. Then his lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was soft as a knife sliding from its sheath. Interessant. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. From the main dining room beyond the closed door, I could hear the gentle clink of silverware, the murmur of normal conversation, the world continuing on as if mine hadn't just shattered completely. I'd corrected Luca De Santis's associate. In his language. In front of his men. And from the way he was looking at me now, like I was a puzzle he intended to take apart piece by piece, I understood with perfect clarity that I'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The amber light from the sconces seemed to dim, or maybe that was just my vision tunneling as De Santis stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes. Then Marco found his voice, stammering in Italian. Signore io non, I didn't mean. Silenzio. De Santis didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The single word cut through the room like a blade, and Marco's mouth snapped shut. De Santis leaned back in his chair, still watching me, his fingers drumming once against the tablecloth. The gesture was casual, almost lazy, but I could see the tension coiled in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked as if he were physically restraining himself. Brava, he said softly, the word dripping with something between admiration and menace. Molto brava. Tell me, cameriera, Where does a waitress learn to correct grammar like a Tuscan schoolteacher? My throat had gone dry. Every instinct screamed at me to apologize, to backpedal, to grovel. But I'd already jumped off the cliff. There was no point grabbing for branches on the way down. My grandmother was from Florence, sir, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. She was particular about language. Ah! He tilted his head, studying me like I was a specimen under glass. And does your grandmother know you're using her lessons to embarrass men in expensive restaurants? She passed away 3 years ago, sir. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to read, before the cold mask settled back into place. He picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, never breaking eye contact. Gentlemen, he said abruptly, switching to English. We're done for tonight. The dismissal was absolute. The men rose immediately, gathering phones and jackets with the efficient urgency of people who knew better than to question. Marco practically tripped over his chair in his haste to leave, his face still pale and blotchy. The silver-haired man paused at the door, glancing back at DeSantis with something that looked like concern, but a single look from his boss sent him through the doorway. In 30 seconds, the room had emptied. Except for us. DeSantis set his glass down with precise care. You may go as well, Signorina Reed. He knew my last name, my full name. The realization hit me like ice water. He'd known exactly who I was before I'd even walked into the room. However, he continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, you will wait in the corridor. Someone will fetch you shortly. It wasn't a request. I nodded once, grabbed my notepad with shaking hands, and walked toward the door. My legs felt disconnected from my body, operating on autopilot. I could feel his eyes burning into my spine with every step. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. The corridor was empty and suddenly too narrow, the walls pressing in. I leaned against the damask wallpaper, trying to catch my breath, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. What have you done? What the hell have you done? I'd lasted 3 months without making waves. 3 months of keeping my head down, my mouth shut, my ambitions carefully hidden. And I'd just thrown it all away for 4 words of grammatical pride. Footsteps approached from the main dining room. Quick, urgent. Vincent appeared around the corner, his face shining with sweat, his eyes wide with barely controlled panic. Kayla. He grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. What did you do in there? Nothing, I just. Mr. DeSantis wants to see you. Vincent's voice cracked on the name. Now. In the private office upstairs. My stomach dropped to my feet. Vincent, I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant. He was already pulling me toward the back staircase, the one reserved for management and VIPs, the one I'd never been allowed to use. When Mr. DeSantis summons you, you go. Immediately. Do you understand? We climbed the stairs in silence, Vincent's hand still clamped around my arm like I might bolt. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have run straight out the kitchen doors and kept running until I hit the East River. But my student loans wouldn't pay themselves. And something told me that running from Luca DeSantis would only make things infinitely worse. We stopped in front of a dark wooden door at the end of a hallway I'd never seen before. Vincent released my arm and stepped back, his face pale. Whatever he asks you, he whispered. Say yes. Do you understand me, Kayla? Whatever he asks, you say yes. Then he knocked twice and retreated down the hallway like the corridor was on fire, leaving me alone in front of the door. From inside, a voice like smoke and steel. Enter. I pushed open the door and stepped into Luca DeSantis's office. The office was smaller than I'd expected, darker. All mahogany paneling and leather furniture that smelled of old money and older secrets. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface pristine except for a single manila folder and a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. DeSantis stood behind the desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The casual intimacy of it felt more threatening than the suit had. And standing against the wall to his right was a man who could only be described as a mountain. 6'5" of solid muscle stuffed into a black suit, arms crossed, face expressionless. He didn't look at me, but I felt his presence like a loaded gun. "Sit," DeSantis said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Sat. My hands twisted together in my lap. He remained standing, picked up the folder, and tossed it across the desk. It landed in front of me with a soft thud. "Open it." My fingers trembled as I flipped it open. The first page was a photocopy of my driver's license. The second was my enrollment confirmation from the Institute of Culinary Education. The third made my blood run cold, a detailed breakdown of my student loans. $87,000 in debt, printed in unforgiving black and white. Page after page. My transcript. Straight A's in advanced culinary techniques, Italian regional cuisine, pastry arts. My work history. My lease agreement. A photograph of my apartment building in Astoria. He'd compiled a dossier on me. Complete profile. "Your grandmother wasn't just from Florence," DeSantis said, circling around the desk with predatory grace. "Caterina Moretti. Born in Fiesole, 1943. Immigrated to Boston in 1967. Died of pancreatic cancer in 2022. He stopped beside my chair, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive. "She taught you Italian from childhood. You minored in it at Boston University. Magna cum laude." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "You're talented, Signorina Reed. Top of your class. Exceptional palate. Wasted potential serving wine to men who wouldn't notice if you spat in it." He leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "So here's what's going to happen. In 2 weeks, I'm traveling to Naples for business negotiations with a very traditional, very particular family. I need someone who can cook authentic regional cuisine and translate conversations that require nuance." He paused, letting the words settle. "You will accompany me as my personal chef and language consultant. 2 weeks. The compensation is $90,000. Enough to clear your debts and fund the rest of your education. $90,000. Financial freedom. Everything I'd been killing myself for. And if I refuse?" The words escaped before I could stop them. His smile was razor thin. "You won't." He pushed off the desk and leaned down, his hands bracing on the armrests of my chair, caging me in. His face was inches from mine, those dark eyes boring into me with terrifying intensity. "You embarrassed me tonight, Kayla. In front of my men. In my restaurant. That carries a price." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "So you will repay that debt by serving me. Obediently. Completely. And when we return, if you've pleased me, you'll walk away free and clear. And if I haven't pleased you," his smile widened, showing teeth, "then I'll make sure every restaurant in this city knows exactly what kind of disrespectful, arrogant little waitress you are. Your career will be over before it begins." My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't an offer. It was a cage with golden bars. "You have until tomorrow morning to accept," he said, straightening. "A car will be waiting outside your apartment at 8 a.m. Be ready." He'd already decided. My answer didn't matter. I didn't sleep. I sat on my second-hand couch in my shoebox apartment, staring at the folder DeSantis had let me keep. Because of course he'd let me keep it, a reminder that he knew everything about me, and tried to convince myself I had a choice. At 3 a.m., I calculated how long I could survive if I quit Il Cavalier and found another serving job. 6 months, maybe 8 if I lived on ramen and gave up heat. My loans would go into default. My credit would implode. The institute would drop me. At 4 a.m., I Googled Luca DeSantis. The results were terrifyingly sparse. A few photos from charity galas, a mention in a Times article about real estate development, nothing concrete. The absence of information was more damning than a criminal record would have been. At 5 a.m., I called my mother in Boston. She didn't answer. Probably for the best. At 6 a.m., I stood in my cramped bathroom and stared at my reflection. My grandmother's eyes looked back at me, that same sharp hazel, that same stubborn set to the jaw. Non abbasser mai la testa, Kayla, she used to say. Never lower your head. I'd lowered it for 6 months. Kept it down, kept quiet, made myself small and invisible and safe. And where had it gotten me? Drowning in debt, serving wine to people who saw me as furniture, my culinary degree gathering dust while I scraped by on tips. At 7 a.m. I started packing. I didn't have much worth taking. Some clothes, my knife roll, my grandmother's recipe notebook with her spidery handwriting in the margins. I left my textbooks stacked on the desk, my rent check on the counter for my roommate. Somehow it felt like preparing for a funeral. At 7:45, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The plane departs at 2 o'clock. Be ready, Kara. Kara, darling. The endearment felt like a collar. I looked out my window. A black town car idled at the curb, sleek and predatory among the battered Hondas and delivery trucks. The driver stood beside it, checking his watch. Waiting for me. My hands shook as I zipped my suitcase. This was insane. I was walking into the lion's den because a dangerous man had decided I belonged to him now. Had decided my moment of defiance required recompense. But I was also walking toward $90,000. Toward freedom. Toward finally using the skills I'd spent years honing in secret. My phone buzzed again. The car is waiting. I grabbed my suitcase, my knife roll, my grandmother's notebook. Took one last look at the apartment that had been my sanctuary and my prison for 6 months. Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and descended the stairs. The driver opened the car door without a word. His face was professionally blank, but I saw the way his eyes tracked my movements, catalogued my trembling hands, my shallow breathing. I slid into the leather interior. The door closed with a solid, final thunk. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of movement in a parked sedan across the street. Another watcher making sure I complied. DeSantis had eyes everywhere. My phone buzzed one more time. Good girl. I turned it off and watched Astoria disappear through the tinted windows. My old life shrinking to nothing behind me. There was no going back now. I'd made my choice, or had it made for me. Either way, when that plane touched down in Naples, I'd be someone else entirely. Kayla Reed, the invisible waitress, was gone. Whoever I became next would have to be strong enough to survive Luca DeSantis. The private jet was obscene in its luxury. Cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, a full bar that probably cost more than my entire education. I'd never been on a plane that didn't smell like recycled air and desperation. DeSantis sat across from me in the cabin, laptop open, reading glasses perched on his nose. The glasses made him look almost human. Almost. We'd been airborne for 20 minutes before he finally acknowledged my existence. The Castellano family, he said without preamble, closing his laptop, has controlled Naples for 3 generations. Shipping, construction, waste management, the legitimate fronts for less legitimate enterprises. They are old world in every sense. Traditional. Suspicious of outsiders. Especially Americans. I nodded, my hands gripped tight in my lap. I'm negotiating a partnership that will benefit both families, but Salvatore Castellano is difficult, proud. He speaks minimal English and considers it beneath him to accommodate anyone who doesn't respect Italian custom. DeSantis removed his glasses, his dark eyes finding mine. Which is where you come in. He stood and moved to a garment bag hanging near the cockpit, unzipped it. Inside were clothes I could never afford. Silk blouses, tailored trousers, a black dress that looked like liquid midnight. You will not dress like a waitress in Naples. You will dress like someone worthy of sitting at my table. He gestured to the bag. Everything has been selected for you. Conservative. Elegant. Respectful. You bought me a wardrobe. I'm ensuring you don't embarrass me. His tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. Salvatore will test you. He'll test your Italian, your knowledge of regional customs, your cooking. If you fail, the negotiation fails. The weight of it settled on my chest like concrete. This wasn't just about translating. I was a prop in a high-stakes performance where one wrong word could get people killed. Now, DeSantis said, sitting back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Let's establish the rules of our partnership. Partnership. As if we were equals. First, loyalty. You speak only when I require it. You translate exactly what I tell you to translate, nothing more. If you freelance, if you editorialize, if you think you know better than me, there will be consequences. His voice never rose above conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. Second, obedience. When we're in Naples, you belong to me. You go where I say, eat what I provide, speak when I allow it. Your independence is suspended for the duration of this trip. My jaw tightened. I'm not your property. No, he agreed softly. You're my investment, and I protect my investments. Or I eliminate them. The cabin seemed to shrink. Third, discretion. Everything you see, everything you hear, everything you learn about my business stays locked in that pretty head of yours. Forever. If I discover you've shared information with anyone, law enforcement, journalists, a future employer, I will make you regret it in ways you can't imagine. He reached across the narrow aisle and tilted my chin up with 2 fingers, forcing me to meet his eyes. Do you understand these rules, Kayla? I wanted to spit in his face. I wanted to run. But I was 30,000 feet in the air, trapped in a metal tube with a man who held my future in his hands. Yes, I whispered. Si, signore, he corrected. My throat burned. Si, signore. He smiled then, satisfied, possessive, and released me. Good girl. Now go try on your new clothes. We land in 6 hours, and I need to see if you can pass as something more than a frightened waitress. Naples hit me like a fever dream. Narrow streets choked with Vespas, laundry strung between crumbling Baroque buildings, the bay stretching blue and infinite beyond the chaos. The air smelled like sea salt, espresso, and something darker I couldn't name. Danger, maybe. History soaked in blood. The car that collected us from the airport was armored. I recognized the reinforced doors, the tinted bulletproof glass. DeSantis sat beside me in silence, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian to someone about security protocols and meeting times. We drove for 40 minutes, climbing into the hills above the city until we reached gates that belonged in a medieval fortress. Stone walls 15 feet high, crowned with iron spikes and security cameras disguised as old-world lanterns. The villa beyond was a sprawling masterpiece of ochre stone and terracotta roofs, gardens manicured with military precision. Armed men in suits flanked the entrance. Welcome to Villa Castellano, DeSantis said as we passed through the gates. For the next 2 weeks, this is home. And prison. The interior was museum quality. Frescoed ceilings, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, furniture that had probably witnessed centuries of family intrigue and violence. A housekeeper in black greeted us in clipped Italian, her eyes sliding over me with obvious disapproval before she led us through corridors that felt more like a labyrinth. My room was surprisingly generous. A 4-poster bed, French doors opening to a balcony overlooking the bay, antique furniture that probably cost more than my life. But the windows had bars, decorative but functional. Prison just like he'd said. 15 minutes, DeSantis said from the doorway. Then someone will take you to the kitchen. He left before I could respond. The kitchen, when I finally saw it, stole my breath. Professional-grade everything. A 8-burner wolf range, copper pots hanging from ceiling racks, a marble pastry station, herbs growing in terracotta pots along the windowsill. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was a temple. An older woman stood at the counter, arms crossed, expression skeptical. Her gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, her apron spotless. Lucia, she said, not offering her hand. Sono la Zwitza di famiglia. I'm the family cook. Kayla, I replied in Italian. It's an honor to work in your kitchen. Her eyebrow arched. At least my Italian had earned me that much. She gestured to the counter where ingredients had been laid out. San Marzano tomatoes, fresh basil, buffalo mozzarella, 00 flour. Signor Castellano ricci'd pizza margherita persina. Fammi vedere cosa sai fare. Mr. Castellano requests pizza margherita for dinner. Show me what you can do. Test. Course it was a test. I rolled up my sleeves and approached the marble station. Reached for the flour, checking its texture between my fingers. Perfectly fine, silky. I'd made pizza dough 1,000 times, but never with this much writing on it. Lucia watched like a hawk as I measured by feel, mixing flour and water and yeast until the dough came together in a shaggy mass. My hands moved through the familiar rhythm. Knead, fold, rest. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. The dough would speak for me. 2 hours later, I slid the pizza into the wood-fired oven. The crust had that perfect elasticity, the toppings arranged with careful simplicity. When I pulled it out, the crust was leopard-spotted and blistered, the cheese bubbling, the basil wilted just enough. Lucia cut a slice, tasted it. Her expression remained neutral for 3 long seconds. Then she nodded once. Acceptable. From her, I suspected that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. DeSantis summoned me to his study after dinner. The room was all dark wood and leather, bookshelves lined with volumes in Italian and English. Machiavelli, Dante, alongside modern business texts. He sat behind a massive desk, tie loosened, sleeves still rolled up. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We begin your real training now. He slid a sheet of paper across the desk. Italian phrases, handwritten in sharp, angular script. Read the first one aloud. Then translate it for me. Picked up the paper. Chi dorm non piglia pesci. Those who sleep don't catch fish. Literal translation, he prompted. The early bird catches the worm. But the subtext is. I didn't ask for subtext yet. His voice was sharp. Literal first. Always literal first. Then context. Then implication. We worked through the list for an hour. Idioms, proverbs, phrases that meant one thing on the surface and something entirely different underneath. Salver capra e cavalli. To save both the goat and the cabbages. Finding impossible compromises. Tra il dire il faire che di mezzo il mare. Between saying and doing, there's an ocean. Promises versus action. Good, he said finally. Now the hard part. He pressed a button on his phone. Moments later, 2 men entered. Marco, who'd been at the restaurant, and another man I didn't recognize, older, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Parliamo del problema di spedizione, DeSantis said to them in Italian. Let's talk about the shipping problem. What followed was 20 minutes of rapid-fire conversation about containers, routes, customs inspections. But embedded in the business talk were coded references. Merchandise that clearly wasn't merchandise, delays that weren't about logistics, associates who'd become liabilities. Translate. DeSantis ordered me halfway through. I repeated everything in English, word for word, including the coded language. The men watched me like I was a bomb that might detonate. When they left, DeSantis leaned back in his chair, studying me. You understood what they were really discussing. Not a question. Yes. And you translated it anyway. Exactly as spoken. No editorializing. No moral judgment. He smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Good. That's what I need from you tomorrow night. He stood and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the darkened gardens. Salvatore Castellano is old school. He'll start the conversation in standard Italian, but if he's comfortable, he'll shift into Neapolitan dialect. If he's testing us, he'll use phrases with double meanings. And if he's threatening me, DeSantis turned, his expression grave. He'll use cultural references, historical allusions, things that don't translate cleanly into English. And you want me to translate those? No. He crossed back to the desk, bracing his hands on it, leaning toward me. I want you to intervene. If you hear something that can't be properly translated, something that will sound innocuous in English but carries a death threat in Italian, you speak up. You find a way to defuse it before I respond to a threat I didn't understand. My mouth went dry. You're asking me to improvise in a Mafia negotiation. I'm asking you to keep me alive. His eyes bored into mine. Because if I die in that dining room tomorrow night, Kayla, you won't make it out of this villa. The weight of it crashed down on me. This wasn't about translation. It was about survival. One more thing, he said, straightening. If violence starts, you get under the table and stay there. Don't be a hero. Don't try to run. Just survive. And if I do all this, if I save your deal and your life, his smile was razor thin, then maybe I'll let you keep yours. The dining room was a masterpiece of controlled intimidation. A long table set with crystal and silver, candles casting shadows that made the frescoed angels on the ceiling look demonic. Salvatore Castellano sat at the head, 70 years old and carved from granite, his eyes sharp as broken glass. His sons flanked him, younger versions of the same ruthless intelligence. DeSantis and I sat across from them. I wore the black dress from the garment bag, my hair pulled back severely, trying to look like I belonged in a room where empires were negotiated over wine. The first hour was civilized. Business discussed in polite Italian, shipping agreements, profit-sharing territories. I translated when asked, my voice steady, professional. Salvatore's eyes tracked me occasionally, assessing, calculating. Then the wine arrived. A 1947 Barolo, older than most people in the room. Salvatore poured it himself, a gesture of either hospitality or threat. Alla famiglia, he toasted. Family. Alla famiglia, DeSantis echoed. They drank. The atmosphere shifted. Salvatore leaned back, switching seamlessly into thick Neapolitan dialect. Sai Luca mio padre diceva semper. Ci via con lo zoppo impara a zoppicare. You know, Luca, my father always said. He who walks with the lame learns to limp. The phrase hung in the air. On the surface, innocuous. But the implication was devastating. DeSantis's associates were weak, and weakness was contagious. DeSantis's jaw tightened fractionally. He'd understood the insult. Salvatore continued, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. E quando un cane malato, si abit prima che infetti il bronco. And when a dog is sick, you put it down before it infects the pack. Death threat. Coded, cultural, devastating. DeSantis opened his mouth to respond, and I saw the rage flashing in his eyes, the pride that would make him say something irrevocable. I didn't think. Just moved. Chiodo schiaccia chiodo, Don Salvatore. For words. One nail drives out another. The table went silent. Every eye turned to me. I met Salvatore's gaze directly, my voice steady. It was an old proverb, formal and conciliatory, acknowledging his point while suggesting that new partnerships could replace old weaknesses. That DeSantis wasn't the problem. He was the solution. Salvatore's expression didn't change for 3 excruciating seconds. Then he laughed, a deep, genuine sound that cracked the tension like glass. Questa ragazza, he said, gesturing to me with his wine glass. Ha pal più gross dei tuoi uomini, Luca. This girl has bigger balls than your men, Luca. DeSantis's hand found my knee under the table, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Warning or gratitude, I couldn't tell. E preziosa, DeSantis said smoothly. She's precious. The negotiation continued. The deal was struck. And I sat there trembling, realizing I'd just saved both our lives with 4 words of my grandmother's wisdom. An hour later, DeSantis pulled me into an empty corridor, his hand wrapped around my wrist, his eyes blazing with something between fury and hunger. You defied me, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I told you to translate, not to speak. You were about to start a war. That wasn't your decision to make. Then fire me. Send me home. I jerked my wrist, but his grip tightened. Or admit that I just saved your life and you can't stand that you needed me. His free hand shot up, cupping my jaw, tilting my face toward his. You're magnificent and infuriating and mine. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It was possession and fury and grudging respect. His mouth claiming mine with the same intensity he brought to everything else. I should have pulled away. Should have slapped him. Instead I kissed him back. When he finally released me, we were both breathing hard. You're not my waitress anymore, Kayla, he said, his thumb brushing my swollen lips. You're my equal, my partner. And God help us both. I looked into those dark, dangerous eyes and realized the truth. I'd stopped being invisible. And there was no going back to safe. God help us both, I whispered. Then I pulled him back down and kissed him again, choosing the dangerous life over the safe one, finally claiming my power, even if it meant belonging to the devil himself. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.